American Airlines Flight 1420 was a flight from Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport to Little Rock National Airport on June 1st, 1999. I will analyze this accident through the shell model and talk about the different interface errors that were exhibited throughout this accident. The shell model is the relationship of human factors and the aviation environment. It is a conceptual model of human factors. The center component is liveware, and it is applied to and interacted with the four other components, which are hardware, environment, software, and liveware. Hardware consists of equipment, tools, aircraft workspace, and other physical resources without human elements. Software consists of the organizational policies, rules, SOPs, and manuals. Environment consists of different factors like climate, temperature, noise, as well as any other social, political, and environmental factors. Liveware is the human component and how factors like teamwork, communication, leadership, and norms influence interactions. Since the center liveware component interacts with the other four components, this creates an interface. To exemplify, the liveware software interface focuses on how humans interact with the non-physical aspects of a system, such as procedures, manuals, checklists. There are other shell interfaces, and they consist of liveware hardware system, liveware environment system, and liveware system. There is supporting evidence throughout this flight operation that shows the different types of interface errors. The aircraft involved in this accident was an ND-82, and the flight was commanded by Captain Bushman, who was an experienced chief pilot with over 10,000 flight hours. The first officer, Michael Orogel, was a new hire and a former U.S. Navy and corporate pilot. On board of American Airlines Flight 1420 were 139 passengers and 6 crew members. The pilots already felt pressure because the flight was 2 hours behind schedule. Nevertheless, American Airlines Flight 1420 took off at 10:40 p.m. At 11:04 p.m., air traffic control issued a weather advisory indicating that there were severe thunderstorms in an area which included Little Rock National Airport. In the event that 1420 is unable to land for any reason, Nashville International Airport is designated as an alternate airport. During the flight, American Airlines dispatcher sent a weather update that thunderstorms were on left and right of Little Rock National Airport, but that the airport was clear. ATC called in and gave an update of the winds. The crosswinds would make it difficult to control the plane on landing, which is why the pilots must quickly determine whether they are in safe limits. So the pilots calculated the strength of the crosswind from its angle to their final approach and decided that 20 knots was the maximum allowable on a wet runway. It became evident that Flight 1420 was destined to become a disaster because it was harder to track the storm since there wasn't a sophisticated radar at Little Rock. Unquestionably, the environment and weather conditions affected the performance of the crew. The liveware environment system was in error in this case because bad weather, low visibility, severe thunderstorms, and heavy rain increased the stress and workload on the crew. Approach controller asked the pilots if they wanted to shoot a visual approach, but the captain declined the visual because of poor visual conditions. The controller then warned the pilots of wind shear. The controller then updated them a new wind speed and direction, and the gust factor at this point exceeded the wet runway crosswind limitation. The pilots prepared for this by changing their approach plan. Instead of using 22 left, they asked to land on runway 4 right so they can land into the wind, which was approved by the controller. As they turned into the new heading, the plane's weather radar lost track of the storm. The turn also delayed the landing by 10 minutes. At this point, switching runways and keeping track of the storm increased the workload and pressure to the pilots. The pilots then decided that they could see the airport well enough to land visually, which would be faster than a full instrument approach. Strong gusts and wind shifts indicated that the thunderstorm was indeed passing through the airport. For anyone flying smaller and lighter aircraft, it is unquestionable that at this point you should divert and land at an alternate. As some time passes, approach control vectors the aircraft to just outside the final approach fix, and then advise that the runway visual range for runway 4 right has dropped to just over 1/2 mile. At this point, heavy rain and thick clouds are obscuring the airfield. The captain seemed uncertain and probably wanted the first officer to check the crosswind chart or RVR. This is an example of LiveWire interface error. In the CVR transcript, there was a lack of communication between the captain and first officer. The captain should have been more assertive and stated to the first officer to check the crosswind chart. The first officer misinterpreted the winds, thinking they were aligned with the runway, when in actuality they were 50 degrees off runway alignment, which is what causes them to exceed the crosswind limitation. The pilot should have never continued the approach to land at this point, especially when the company's maximum crosswind regulation component was exceeded. This is an example of LiveWire software error, since the pilots were not following the company's regulations. As the pilots continue the approach, the visibility drops below the limit. Air traffic control then informs them that the runway visual range is now 1,600 feet. The first officer then states that they're off course but manages to see the runway. The aircraft was never able to come to a proper and full stop. This is an example of LiveWire hardware interface error because the flight crew did not ensure that the spoilers were extended after the touchdown, and there was also a late use of reverse thrust after landing. The captain also failed to manually extend the spoilers when they did not deploy. As a result, the airplane overran the runway 100 miles per hour and collided into the raised approach lights. The NTSB found that the cause of the crash was the pilot's simple failure to arm the spoilers, which is the single most important factor in the flight crew's ability to stop the aircraft within the available runway length. The NTSB report also found that the pilots did not complete the second half of the before landing checklist. Following the crash, American Airlines revised the checklist so that the pilots will confirm that the spoilers are armed. To conclude, through the flight details noted in the CVR transcript, the crew's lack of composure and disorientation is evident. Through the events, it is clear to me the pilots should have adhered to proper procedure and taken the safest measures to protect passengers and crew on board. A time schedule should never override proper judgment and protocol. In our profession, poor judgment and poor decisions result in aircraft damages and in several cases loss of lives. Therefore, it has lasting implications. And because of this, with the flight crew's inability to properly operate in these conditions made this a tragic result. Furthermore, analyzing this accident through the shell model goes beyond explaining where human nature and performance failed. It can help us understand our interactions with the aviation environment given a set of circumstances and hopefully prevent further tragedies like American Airlines Flight 1420 from happening again.